All right, class. So I do wish we were doing this in person, but obviously the circumstances are not permitting that. We will get to Zoom chats soon, I hope, that you'll be able to join me on those. I don't think we're there just yet, but soon. And of course, I will email you all when I think it's time for those. So this is your assignment this week. Is to really start thinking about. So I wanted you to think about the sociological imagination. So what makes something a social problem rather than an individual problem? I wanted you to think about. Last week, I was trying to focus on, well, what information where would we get the information that we need in order to understand certain issues. And so this week I wanted to focus on, well, what conditions actually lead an issue into becoming a social problem. So, I'm going to leave that to you to pick a few social issues and then to explain why you identify them as social problems. What I'm going to do over the next several minutes or so is explain the conditions um, that would need to exist in order for us to consider something a social problem. So, a social problem exists when an influential group, okay, this would be a group that has some power, or is recognized. Perhaps it's because this group is either large enough that it has power, or perhaps it has political power or monetary power. When this group says something is threatening values that are important to that group, okay, that the condition affects a large enough number of people, and then this is very important, that it can be remedied by collective action, right? We could say that hurricanes, are awful, right? We could have a group of powerful people say hurricanes are awful, they impact a lot of people, and how's it it's threatening values because it's tearing down my house. That's important to me. However, there is no remedy, that we know of right now where we can prevent a hurricane from happening or redirect a hurricane so that it doesn't impact people. So the remedy is important, okay? We also see that some influential groups have more power than others. Um, as I note here in the bottom, folks from PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, have been probably less successful in their work, not necessarily in terms of us understanding that it's a social problem, but in terms of getting the resources needed to address and remedy the situation. That probably has been less than other areas where the influential group has been more powerful and has gotten more resources to help remedy the issue. Okay? So, threatening a group's values. Oh, there's Timmy. My dog Timmy's barking. I think he hears, might have been like, I don't know what's going on outside. I hear a slight sound of a mower, maybe a mile away, and he's upset about that. All right, let me get back. But if you hear Timmy throughout the presentation, I apologize, but he does like to he likes to get angry at outdoor noises. So, values this is what people think are right and wrong, right? And so social problems may be viewed, some groups may look at a social problem differently and identify a social problem differently than another group if their values are different. Let's think about abortion. So there are people who look at abortion as a social problem. And I would say there are probably two camps out there that look at abortion as a social problem. One group would say, well, abortion is a social problem in that women do not have the right to get abortion in some area. They don't have the access to these resources. Another group of people might be looking at abortion as something that should be banned. The fact that it is legal anywhere is wrong, right? So when we're looking at the topic of abortion, there could be, I mean, there might be even more camps than those two. Those are two pretty common camps in that, and they're identifying the social problem differently because they have different values. Okay? So once something is threatening a group's values, then that checks off another box. We have a influential group threatening its values, okay? Large enough, right here, the condition has to affect a large enough number of people. Now, what is large enough? It's relative, right? It could be 1,000 people. It could be 1,000,000 people. It's all about how the influential group is kind of selling this message, because there are definitely when we look at numbers, right? So if you remember, some of you didn't take me for intro. If you did take me for intro, we talk about suicide, and I do think that people would categorize suicide as a social problem. People probably would also categorize homicide as a social problem. When we look, though, at those two, homicide and suicide, I think for a lot of people, they tend to um, be more concerned about homicide. Now, there are approximately 3 times more suicides than homicides each year. That's probably unknown to you if you didn't look into the data. The the news, the influential groups, the coverage is different on those topics. And so while I think both of those would be considered social problems, the resources that are given to remedy each of those, the attention, tends to be more towards the issue of homicide rather than suicide, even though the numbers are different. So there is no set number. It just has to be a large enough group that we're not saying this is a social problem and it's impacting one person. It's impacting 10 people. That's probably, I mean, there's no finite set number where we're saying, well, it's got to get to this number. But a handful of people is probably not going to meet the criteria of a large group of people. We're saying this is a social problem. Okay. The last condition is that there needs to be a potential remedy. Even if it's not, even if it doesn't seem to be something like, let's say, financially feasible, that doesn't mean that there's not a remedy. So you could think of, well, if we had all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, could we address this social problem? And that's where you check that last box, right? So if we're going back to suicide, we know that there are um, primary reasons that may lead someone to commit suicide. If you remember back to our discussions on anomie, if we were to provide counseling to folks after they lose their jobs and make it mandatory, right? Have these check-ins that occur. If we were to do the same with divorce, health issues, I mean, there's a number of these conditions that we see are patterned. And so while it may not prevent every single suicide, it could lessen the number of suicides if we were to put in these measures that would be uh, hopefully very helpful to preventing suicide. So to clarify, um, a social problem needs to have that powerful group. Okay. Um, go back up here real quick because I want to talk about objective and subjective conditions. But social problem exists when that group of power, an influential group, sees something that's threatening their values. It's impacting a large enough number of people, and there's a potential remedy. Okay. Now, when we talk about objective conditions and subjective conditions, what we're talking about is, so an objective condition would be the extent of the problem. The subjective condition would be the threat to the values of that we're talking about. So, and there are times where there are conditions where people can agree on the objective condition, right? So if we were to talk about something like unemployment, joblessness, or homelessness, we could look at the number. How many people are unemployed? How many people are homeless, right? And you could ask folks, does this concern you? And they might say, yes, it does. I do not like that many people are homeless. I don't like that many children are homeless. But then when it comes to the subjective condition, the values, there might be some folks who say we need to put policies in place that help to that that maybe give them a second chance, that help get them on the right path. However, other folks may say, well, I understand that's a problem. They made a bad decision. They, um, you know, they shouldn't have done this or they shouldn't have done that or something like, whatever it might be. And so while unemployment to them is, they see it, like, well, we wish it wasn't like that, they may not actually value the cause of the problem. Maybe education inequality or something along those lines, access to those resources to be successful in K through 12 and college and so on. And so the potential remedy may be very different because of whether or not there is that value that has been impacted. Next week, we're going to get into the relationship to social problems and policy analysis, which is kind of what you see at the bottom of this slide here. Okay? And I'll just end on this. Social problems are what people think they are. And again, go back to the abortion issue. You know, two different camps are looking at the same issue, but identifying it totally different as a social problem. And so when you go to work on your assignment, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be saying, this is a social issue, and it is being considered a social problem because of A, B, C, D. And maybe if you come up with others, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, there might be other conditions that you want to include other than the ones that I've gone over. But you may find, like, this is what would be great about a class, is there might be someone who says, I think this is a social problem because of this influential group, this number of people, the values, and this potential remedy. And there could be someone else in the class who's looking at that same exact issue, but framing the problem in a much different way, kind of like what I had talked about with abortion. Okay, so use your critical thinking skills and come up with some good stuff this week.